we've all seen it. Somebody holding a big John 3:16 sign at a sporting event. Is that helpful? Is it intrusive? And what would Ben put on a sign if he had to do one? Welcome to the To Be the Church podcast, where we explore what it looks like to truly be the church in today's culture. It's Ben right there. I'm Tyler. Cody is behind the camera. And Ben, how you doing, man?
I'm good. I was realizing I think this is the first time I've ever recorded this podcast in the morning. Feels a little different. Usually this is an afternoon thing.
Our voices may be a little more,
Yeah.
I don't know what the word is, but deeper and morning-ish.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maybe brain's a little clearer. I don't know. It's not the afternoon.
That's definitely not how my brain works.
It's not?
No, not at all.
You're more sharp in the afternoon?
Oh, yeah. Like, it's not
Oh,
close.
I'm the opposite.
Yeah. We weren't planning on talking about this, but let's go ahead and do it. Like, have you figured out, like, what is your ideal getting things done, like, routine?
Yeah, definitely the morning. So anything where it's requiring, like, a lot of, I wouldn't say deep thinking, but, like, analyzing, like, so studying for sermons, creating, so writing, being creative. I'm way better in the morning. In the afternoon, I'm kind of, my brain's tired, a little sleepy. So I actually try to plan all my sermon prep, study, reading primarily in the morning. And then afternoon is like busy work, meeting with people, stuff like that. So I don't know.
Meeting with people is called busy work to you?
Busy work, another thing I do, meeting with people, where it's more just relational and not as much creative. But obviously in ministry, there's plenty of afternoons where I still have to work on my sermon, and I just push through it. But
yeah,
sharper earlier in the day.
Yeah, I'm the opposite. Like, I'll sit down at a coffee shop, and it'll take me 2 to 3 hours just to get there. And so I do most of my admin stuff in the morning, reply to emails, stuff like that, whatever I need to do. I plan my day. I will journal in the morning, which is, some people could say is like creative, you know. But yeah, like in a perfect world, which I don't live in a perfect world, but in a perfect world, like 7 p.m. to 11 p.m. is like my most creative time.
Okay.
So usually in my non-perfect world, by that time I'm really tired from like putting kids to bed, and I just want to do nothing.
Right.
But like with everything else being equal, like that is like the prime time for me.
Even for work-related stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep, for anything.
Huh.
Yeah, and just a couple nights ago, it happened to where like I was laying in bed and I just couldn't sleep, and I knocked out. I like got out of bed and worked at like midnight, 12:30, and like knocked out probably like a few hours of work in less than an hour. Just, yeah, I don't know.
Interesting.
Anyway, let's get to our question for the day. All right. This came in via email. It says this: at sporting events, you'll often see a sign with John 3:16 on it. What are your thoughts on these signs? Are they helpful or intrusive or something else in your opinion? And then a follow-up question: if you were to put a Bible verse on a sign other than John 3:16, what would it be? So let's take it question by question.
Interesting.
What are your thoughts on like people? I mean, we've all seen it, right?
Yeah.
Like John 3:16. Tim Tebow used to put it in his eye black and stuff like that. You know.
Yeah.
He was a hero of the faith, some may say. But
also Stone Cold Steve Austin 3:16, a little different.
Yeah, a little different. But yeah, all right. So Ben, what are your thoughts? Are they helpful or intrusive or something else?
I would assume that people who do that have really good intentions, right? They're thinking, hey, John 3:16 is kind of the gospel in a nutshell. It's very clear, the gospel from that one verse. And so I'm sure their intent is to be bold with, hey, here's a verse of scripture that if you look it up and read it, it's going to explain for you that God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that by believing in him, you can have everlasting life. So is it effective? I don't know. I think our culture is becoming more and more biblically illiterate, that I think they would probably not even know. Many people would not even know, like, who's John and what are these numbers by it.
Yeah,
like,
is that a wrestler?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I don't think maybe in the past people would know that it's a Bible reference, but I think a lot of people today would say, who's John and what are those numbers? What do those mean? I don't think they're thinking, oh yeah, John is who wrote it, and then you have the chapter and verse. And so in that sense, I don't know if it's very effective or helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know. I might even say that because we're so biblically illiterate as a culture, that might make it more effective. Because like 20 years ago, it would be a scenario where it's like, oh, of course, that's that Bible verse, whatever. But somebody might be like, oh, I wonder what that is, and Googled,
That's true.
that, because if there's less familiarity with it, then that might be
That's true, because I was thinking people would probably struggle to find it in their Bible, or in a Bible. But yeah, today they can just Google it. And I saw that one time there was like, what's the most Googled Bible verses and stuff. And I think actually when guys like Tebow would have it and people are watching football, they would Google what is that. And so, I mean, I'm all for people getting their eyes on Scripture and reading Scripture. And
one of the parts of the question was, is it intrusive? Like, where would that idea come from? From it, like that that having that would be an intrusive thing.
I guess some people could see it as being too forward with, this kind of idea in our culture of, hey, you need to keep your religious views to yourself. Don't try to cram it down anyone else's throat. Don't try to be, overly zealous and say, hey, you should believe this. And so it kind of comes from the relativism of our culture that, hey, cool, you believe that, but don't try to push that on me. Again, I don't think
like the coexist idea.
Yeah. But I think people would say, hey, that's cool. That's your opinion, that you believe the Bible, you believe what that says, but don't try to convince me to believe it as well. But I mean, to me, that's kind of like, I don't think it's intrusive for someone to put that on a sign. But I could see how our culture is very relativistic, doesn't want anyone to be dogmatic about anything.
Yeah. Would you find it intrusive if maybe a reference to the Quran was on a sign in a American sporting event?
I mean, no. I'm all for religious liberty, in our country. So I think people should be able to express themselves religiously and worship freely, even if I think it's wrong and I disagree with it. But I don't know.
Yeah. So
go
ahead.
So one more thing that kind of made me, or I thought of it when we were talking about this, is John 3:16 is a good one because it's the gospel very clearly. But what's a problem, I think, is when guys like Tebow or others put verses that are taken out of context, like Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me, and they're putting that on their eye black or on their sneaker, and then it's like it's being applied to sports, which I think that does more damage than good, because it's not good exegesis. It's not what the verse actually means.
So what does that verse actually mean?
Well, in the context, Paul's talking about being content, all right? And so he's thanking them for the church in Philippi for the gifts that they've given him, but talking about how he's learned how to be content, whether he has much or whether he has little. And then he goes, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. So he's talking about the spiritual life, this trust in God, this contentment, that he can do all things. And so I think when we apply it to our spiritual lives of obeying Christ, of living out our Christian life, we can do all things that he calls us to do. It doesn't mean, and trust me, sometimes I wish it did. It doesn't mean that when I played basketball, I could dunk because of that, or that I'm going to be able to run a 40-yard dash in 4.3 seconds or whatever. It doesn't mean that. And so when it's applied to sports in that way, I think it does more damage than good.
Yeah, so the question asker definitely was not going this direction. But what do you think, why do you think cherry picking verses like that out of context and making them mean what they don't mean is so prevalent today?
That's a good question.
And I don't know, maybe it's been prevalent for 1,500 years, but I feel like I'm seeing it more now in the last 15, 20 years. Maybe it's because I'm paying attention, but what do you think?
I think we're always prone as human beings to be man-centered instead of God-centered. I think that's what's at the heart of sin, is not acknowledging God as God, but instead worshiping created things instead of the Creator, including ourselves. And so when you pluck verses out of context, you are able to kind of make them say whatever you want them to say and be more focused on you and yourself and those sorts of things. And so I think the God-centered way to approach Scripture is to say, okay, God, what have you said in context? There's this one story, there's different books and different things going on here, but what have you actually said? And then whatever you've said is what I'm going to believe and live in light of, and those things. The more man-centered way is to say, here's how I feel. It's kind of a super prevalent in our culture. My feelings are the final authority. Here's how I feel. Here's what I think. Here's what I believe. Okay, now let me find Scripture that backs that up. And when you take something out of context, you may be able to misinterpret and misapply it to back up what you already think. And so that's one danger of topical preaching, although not all topical preaching is bad. But oftentimes, and I did this early in ministry, it's like, here's what I want to say. Here's what I already think. Now let me go and find Scripture that kind of backs up what I want to say. And so that puts me in the driver's seat. It makes me and what I think and feel the final authority, rather than, God, what have you said? And then I'm going to just say what you've said and believe what you've said. And it puts God in the driver's seat. So,
yeah. My next question you hit on was like, what role does preaching play in that? Like, and I think a lot of times it's not simply something that happens in an instant, but if you sit under preaching for 30 years, for the whole of your adult life, that is biblical. That is, I would say, that's expositional. That is really exposing what's in Scripture. Then you're at a lower risk of doing that, or at least there's going to be more red flags in your head as you're doing that than somebody who hears 3 decades of sermons on the subject of love. Right.
Yeah, and it comes down to an understanding of what Scripture is. Scripture is not just these little kind of self-help statements, almost like it's just a collection of thoughts, almost like, you think of like those little calendars that have like a motivation for the day or something. That's not what it is. We have narrative, we have letters, we have poetry. And so understanding the genres of Scripture and how they all fit together and understanding the context, that's super important, because only within the context can you actually understand what's being said. What's really interesting is we've all been taken out of context before, right? Someone comes to you and says, hey, Ben said this, and it's one sentence. And in isolation, that could sound really bad. And we hate that, because maybe you would come and approach me and I'd say, well, wait a second, that's out of context. Like, here's what I said before that and after that, and it gives clarity. So we hate being taken out of context, but we do that to God all the time with His Word. Like, we pluck something out and we say, this is what this means, without actually looking at, well, no, that can't be what it means, because God has revealed this in this part of Scripture, and He doesn't contradict Himself, and so we have to figure out what He's actually saying. And so context is king in biblical interpretation. One of my profs, Todd Miles, used to say, if in real estate, it's all about location, location, location. In Bible interpretation, it's all about context, context, context. And so, yeah, you don't just flip through Scripture and find one sentence and then kind of make it say or mean whatever. You have to read it in its context, and then you'll actually get the real meaning, and you'll actually be confident that you're hearing from God. You're hearing His Word.
Okay, so based on the last 10 minutes of conversation, let's go back to the original question. Do you think that verses like John 3:16 on a sign at a Oregon Ducks game or whatever is helpful or intrusive or something else?
I'd probably say something else.
Yeah.
Meaning, like, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. I don't think it's super helpful. But if someone saw that, Googled it, and read John 3:16, John 3:16 is a verse that even in isolation is I think very clear. Not saying you should read it out of context, but if you know the rest of the context of the Gospel of John and Scripture as a whole, it is kind of this summary statement of God's love for the world, sending the Son, salvation by faith. And so there are certain verses that are easier to understand in isolation. not saying that we should always, just pluck things out like that. So I'm kind of indifferent towards it. If people want to do it, that's fine. I don't think it's overly intrusive. It's, we have the freedom in this country to believe what we want to believe and say what we want to say. But
slap who we want to slap.
Slap who we want to slap. If you talk about their wife, yeah. And I'm even thinking, because wasn't the third part like if you had a verse?
Yeah, let's go there last.
Sign,
Yeah, what would you do? Like if like somebody said, hey, you have to do a sign at your next 49ers game that you go to, and it had to be a Bible verse.
It had to be a Bible. Yeah. Just the reference.
Yeah, just the reference.
See, if I was going to do it, I'd probably actually put the verse.
Oh, you'd actually write it out?
I think so.
Yeah.
This makes me think of, there's a lot of examples like this. Like when you're driving up north on I-5 here in Washington, there's like that huge billboard.
With Uncle Sam on it, or that?
There's that one, but then there's one that's just like Jesus died to save sinners or something that. And you see, I remember down in Oregon, I think they're in Washington too, there's these 1-800-TRUTH things that are like all these different things. And I've thought about that. Like, is that obviously costs a lot of money. I'm sure the intention behind it is good, but is it actually effective? I don't know. But I was thinking, like, I've done this in the sense of years ago around Halloween, we stopped carving pumpkins because with little kids, it was just like a huge mess, and we just paint them, which is also kind of messy. But so I usually do one. I'm like, what the heck am I going to paint on this? So I usually will put I remember one year I did Romans 5:8 for God demonstrates his love in this, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. And so I'm putting that on my front doorstep thinking trick-or-treaters are going to read that. And my thought was, it just explains while we're sinners, Christ died for us. And that's how God showed his love. So that would be kind of similar.
Yeah.
I have no knowledge of anyone being converted from my painted pumpkin.
But you won't know. That song, Thank You for Giving to the Lord, tells us that we'll find out when we get to heaven.
It's true. Maybe we will. And so, Romans 5:8, I might put on a sign.
I'd probably do Ephesians 2:1-10.
Yeah.
Is that cheating?
No, that's a long one. But that would be a good one.
Yeah. What about just an entire book, like the book of Romans?
I think again, that would be like, what is Romans? What the heck are we talking about here? But
have you ever gone to a sporting event? This is just curiosity, and had a sign. Like, have you ever made a sign for a sporting event? Like, obviously not necessarily scripture related, but just in general.
I don't think I have, which is kind of surprising. What about you?
My brother did, and we got on TV a bunch for it.
I remember this story.
Yeah, so
was he dressed up as a baby?
Yeah, it was Halloween night.
Okay.
Monday Night Football. We were sitting in the front row of the end zone in Kansas City, and he was dressed up as a baby. He slicked his hair back to make him look bald, wore a pacifier, wore a onesie. I was dressed up as a baseball player, like a Brian Wilson. I remember that guy, the long beard. Mm-hmm. But yeah, my brother had a big sign, and the Chiefs were playing the Chargers, and Phillip Rivers was the quarterback, and Phillip Rivers is insanely famous for just being the whiniest player in the world. He whines at his teammates, whatever. But my brother had a sign that said Phillip, and then in between Phillip Rivers, it said Phillip Cry Me a Rivers.
Okay.
And then he made a play at the end of the game that lost him the game, and he was yelling at his teammates, and ESPN would go from that, from Phillip Rivers to my baby brother in his 20s, but my baby brother holding a sign that said Phillip Cry Me Rivers. They went back and forth 3 times, and it was
wow.
Yeah, that was.
Do you have that on record?
Well, I mean, I have NFL Game Pass, so I bet I could go back and find it.
Oh, yeah,
because they have all the whatever. But
back in the day, you would record it on a VHS and keep that, but I don't know really how you do that anymore.
That was probably 2011, I think, maybe 2012, because I know because my oldest kid was already born. But we're getting far off the question now. But yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts, maybe on this subject or others. Feel free to email us. podcast@toBeTheChurch is the best way to do that. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also leave it in the comments below. But yeah, have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll see you next Friday.